The dawn slipped into St. Mary Mead with a stillness that felt almost sentient, a delicate mist threading through the garden like a shroud over secrets yet untold. Inside her modest cottage, Miss Jane Marple sat ensconced in her worn armchair, the rhythmic click of her knitting needles weaving a quiet counterpoint to the soft whistle of the kettle on the stove. The morning was ordinary in every way, gentle, predictable, the kind of day that promised little beyond the comfort of routine. Yet, as the post slipped through the letterbox with its familiar thud, something shifted. A catalog of gardening tools, a brief note from a niece in Devon, and then an anomaly, an envelope of thick, creamy paper, its surface embossed with a bold crest that stirred a flicker of recognition deep in her memory. Miss Marple's fingers paused mid-stitch, the needles resting in her lap as she traced the name written in elegant, slightly tremulous script. Lady Sylvia Harrow. The name tugged at the edges of her recollection, pulling forth fragmented images of a woman she'd known only through the gauze of village gossip, a figure of faded elegance and whispered scandals, married into the Harrow family, whose lineage bore the weight of both grandeur and shadow. Miss Marple slit the envelope with a letter opener, her movements precise, and unfolded the contents. The letter was an invitation, its tone formal, yet edged with a peculiar urgency that belied its courteous phrasing. She was requested, nay, summoned, to attend an estate auction at Ashgrove Hall, where the Harrow family's renowned silver collection was to be dispersed to the highest bidders. "I hope that you might find it of interest," Sylvia had written, the words dangling like a lure cast into still waters. Miss Marple had no particular fondness for auctions, nor for the gleam of silverware, but she recognized the scent of a puzzle when it drifted across her path. She folded the letter with care, her gray eyes narrowing as a faint, knowing smile curved her lips. Without fully grasping why, she knew she would go. Later that morning, the grocer's shop hummed with its usual chorus of chatter. Mrs. Weatherby lamenting the price of tea, old Mr. Timmins grumbling about the damp, but the air thickened when Miss Marple mentioned Ashgrove Hall. The shopkeeper, a wiry man named Higgs with a perpetual squint, froze mid-motion, his hands hovering over a jar of marmalade as if it had suddenly grown thorns. "Strange business, that," he muttered, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial rasp, as though the shelves might overhear. "The silver spoon, you know, can't think why they'd dig it up again." The name struck a chord, faint and elusive, like a melody half remembered from a distant room. Miss Marple tilted her head, her tone as mild as a spring breeze. "The silver spoon, you say?" Higgs glanced toward the door, then leaned closer, his words a hiss over the counter. "Bad luck is tied to that bit of silver, or so they say. Been that way ever since." He stopped abruptly, his squint deepening as he shook his head. "Not my place to stir old pots, miss. You'd do well to steer clear." At the post office, the same unease bubbled up, cloaked in half-spoken tales. "A tragedy at a ball," the postmistress murmured, her fingers pausing over a stack of envelopes. "Family shame, some say. A curse on that spoon," half in jest, half in dread. Her eyes darted to the window, as if expecting the mist to carry the words away. Miss Marple offered no comment, her smile polite and unassuming, but her mind became a quiet vault, each fragment of gossip slipping into its proper drawer. She'd learned long ago that truth didn't shout. It whispered, lurking in the spaces where words faltered. The journey to Ashgrove Hall was a jostling affair, the car rattling along a drive so uneven the gravel seemed to groan beneath the wheels. The hall rose before her like a relic of forgotten glory, its stone facade grand yet weary, cracks spidering through the foundation, ivy clawing upward in a wild, untamed embrace. Lady Sylvia stood at the threshold, her thin frame swathed in silk the color of twilight, her smile as brittle as a shard of glass. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice a melody strained at the edges, trembling with notes she couldn't quite suppress. "How kind of you to come." Her eyes betrayed her, a tightness around the edges, a flicker of something deeper than welcome, something closer to dread. Miss Marple inclined her head, her own expression serene, though her gaze lingered a moment too long on Sylvia's trembling hands. The household gathered in the hall, a tableau frozen in awkward civility, each figure a player in a drama yet to unfold. Mr. Giles Harrow stood rigid as a sentinel, his thin mouth a line of disapproval etched deep, his dark suit pressed to a sharpness that seemed to cut the air. Beside him, his wife, Clara, fluttered like a bird caught indoors, her bracelets jangling with every nervous gesture, her laughter too bright, too brittle. A younger man, Julian, perhaps a nephew, lounged against the banister, his posture casual, his hands thrust deep into his pockets, yet his eyes gleamed with a sharpness that belied his indifference, darting from face to face like a hawk sizing up prey. The staff lined the walls in neat rows, their uniforms crisp but their faces a gallery of unease, eyes lowered, shoulders tense, as if Miss Marple's arrival heralded the opening curtain of a play they'd long feared to perform. She took it all in, every stance, every glance, every unspoken tremor, and filed it away in her mind's quiet ledger, a catalog of human secrets she'd spent a lifetime compiling. "Shall we?" Sylvia said, her voice a forced lilt as she gestured toward the drawing room. The silver collection awaited there, a glittering array beneath glass domes and polished oak cases that seemed to hum with the weight of history. Candlesticks cast long, wavering shadows across the walls. Goblets gleamed with a cold, unyielding elegance. Trays bore the scars of generations, each piece meticulously labeled with tiny plaques tracing the Harrow lineage back through centuries of pride and shadow. But it was the silver spoon that drew Miss Marple's eye. A modest thing, smaller than she'd imagined, its shape unremarkable, its surface polished to a mirror's sheen. It sat alone in its case, a velvet cushion cradling it like a relic, yet there was an indefinable weight to it, a presence that seemed to pull the room inward. The butler, a stooped figure named Grayson with hands gnarled by years of service, paused as he dusted its case, his cloth lingering a moment too long. "Strange piece, that," he murmured, his voice slipping out like a confession he hadn't meant to voice. "Should have been melted down, if you ask me, after what happened." Sylvia's head snapped toward him, her eyes a silent command, sharp as a whip crack. Grayson's hand trembled, the cloth slipping slightly as he withdrew, his lips pressing into a thin line. Miss Marple met his gaze briefly, noting the tremor, the way his shoulders hunched as if bracing for a blow, and the abrupt silence that followed, a silence thick with edges, jagged and unspoken. She didn't press. She watched, letting the moment settle like dust on a forgotten shelf. "What happened, I wonder?" she thought, her mind already threading the first strands of a web she couldn't yet see. The auction preview unfolded like a play rehearsed too often, its polite surface a fragile mask over sharper currents. Miss Marple settled into a corner chair, her presence as unobtrusive as a shadow, her gray eyes alive with a quiet, relentless curiosity. The heirs stood apart, their exchanges clipped and heavy with unspoken resentment. Giles's entitlement a taut wire stretched to breaking, Clara's chatter a nervous shield against the silence, Julian's boredom a carefully crafted mask for something keener, his fingers tapping a restless rhythm against the arm of his chair. Collectors circled the cases with predatory grace, their eyes glinting with avarice, while a gaggle of village gossips, Mrs. Price among them, hovered near the edges, their whispers a hungry chorus eager for scraps of scandal. The silver spoon rested in its place of honor, a small spotlight casting its gleam across the room, yet some guests averted their eyes, as if its shine might pierce through their own facades. "Quite a collection," Clara said, her voice too loud, her bracelets clashing like tiny cymbals. "Family pride. You know, centuries of it, all laid out here." Giles shot her a look, his mouth tightening. "Pride doesn't pay the bills," he muttered, his tone clipped, his eyes flicking to the spoon with something akin to distaste. Julian smirked, leaning closer to Miss Marple's chair. "They say it's cursed, you know," he said, his voice low and teasing, though his gaze held a flicker of something darker. "Bad luck follows it like a dog on a leash." Miss Marple smiled faintly, her tone mild. "Does it now? I've found luck depends more on people than objects, Mr. Harrow." He blinked, caught off guard, then grinned, a grin that didn't reach his eyes. The auctioneer, a wiry man with a nasal voice, stepped forward, his hammer poised to begin the proceedings. "Lot 1, he intoned, "a pair of Georgian candlesticks." His words were cut short by a murmur that rippled through the room, low and urgent, swelling into a cacophony of gasps and shouts. The silver spoon was gone. The velvet-lined case stood empty, its latch unfastened, the glass dome lifted just enough to reveal the void within. No one had seen it touched. No hand had brushed the case. No shadow had crossed its path. Yet the spoon had vanished as if spirited away by the mist itself. Servants darted in confusion, their footsteps a frantic patter against the polished floor. Heirs shouted demands, their voices overlapping in a discordant clamor, and Lady Sylvia's hand trembled against her gown, her face draining to a ghostly pallor that seemed to leach the color from the room. "Where is it?" Giles barked, his fists clenching at his sides. "Who's responsible?" Clara's laughter turned shrill, a note of hysteria breaking through. "Oh, it's the curse, isn't it? I told you, Giles." "Quiet, Clara," he snapped, his eyes blazing. The auctioneer froze, his hammer a useless prop dangling in midair, his voice swallowed by the din. Julian leaned back, arms crossed, his smirk widening. Well, he murmured, "someone's got sticky fingers." Miss Marple remained still, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze tracing the chaos with the calm precision of a cartographer mapping uncharted terrain. She noted the clenched fists, the gaps in the shouted questions, and the one figure standing too calm amid the storm. Julian, his smirk a mask she couldn't yet pierce. Sylvia swayed, her breath catching, then crumpled to the floor in a rustle of silk, her collapse so sudden it stilled the crowd like a thunderclap. The butler rushed to her side, lifting her to a chair as her lips moved soundlessly, words trapped in a throat too constricted to release them. Miss Marple leaned closer, her senses sharp, catching not merely shock but a deeper dread, a fear too profound for a missing trinket. "What do you hide, Sylvia?" she thought, her mind threading the mystery tighter. "What weight pulls you down?" The housekeeper, a stout woman named Mrs. Ellis with a face carved by years of worry, lingered by the door, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles gleamed white. Her voice came as a hushed murmur, meant for no one yet reaching Miss Marple's keen ear. "The curse has returned." It was no theatrical flourish, but a resigned certainty, as if she'd always known the shadow would creep back. The staff exchanged glances, furtive, fleeting, a ripple of unease passing through them like a shared secret whispered in the dark. Miss Marple didn't believe in curses. She'd seen too much of human folly to credit superstition with the sins of men, but she believed in fear, and fear had taken root in these walls, its tendrils deep and unyielding. Amid the flurry of panic, her eyes drifted to the empty case. A smudge of silver polish marred the velvet lining, a careless mark, a silent witness left behind. She tucked it away, her thoughts turning like the slow grind of a millstone. "Silver doesn't vanish alone," she mused, and someone's hands tremble with more than polish. The absence of the maid gnawed at her, a thread dangling loose in the weave of the day. Ellen Marsh, a name whispered in the village, had been expected at Ashgrove Hall, her arrival quietly arranged to bring documents settling the spoon's provenance, a task meant to close an old chapter. Yet she had vanished from her lodging the night before, leaving no telegram, no explanation, only an empty room and a cold hearth. The housekeeper delivered the news with a mask of neutrality, but her hands betrayed her, wringing her apron as if squeezing out an unspoken truth. She was to come this morning, Mrs. Ellis said, her voice flat, her eyes fixed on the floor. No word since yesterday. Miss Marple tilted her head, her tone gentle. No word at all. How curious. Mrs. Ellis flinched, a flicker of something, guilt, perhaps, crossing her face before she smoothed it away. "People change their minds," she muttered, but her hands tightened further, the apron twisting into knots. Miss Marple's inquiries through the village painted a portrait in shades of shadow and light. At the grocer's, Mrs. Higgs, the shopkeeper's wife, recalled Ellen as a quiet girl with a pretty smile, unlucky with gentlemen callers, always the wrong sort. At the inn, old Mr. Timmins, nursing a pint, grumbled of her sudden departure years ago. Left Ashgrove Hall one night, no word to anyone. Silver went missing, they said, pinned it on her, poor lass, though I never believed it. By the churchyard gate, two elderly sisters, Mrs. Eliza and Rose, whispered of scandal over their tea. "Pretty little thing," Eliza said, her voice a conspiratorial hush. too friendly with. Well, you know. Rose coughed pointedly, but Miss Marple's silence drew the thread out like wool from a spindle. One of the Harrow boys, they say, Rose admitted, her eyes darting to her sister. A hushed affair, all promises and heartbreak. She vanished after. Should have known her place. Eliza nodded sagely. No good comes of crossing lines. Miss Marple's smile remained mild, her thoughts a quiet storm. Not her fault alone, she mused. But the weight always falls on the weakest shoulders. A romance, a theft, a disappearance, threads tied to that spoon, I'd wager. That night, as she settled into the guest room Sylvia had insisted she take, the roads are treacherous after dark, she'd said, her voice too eager. A rustle beneath the door broke the silence. An envelope, nameless and unstamped, slid across the floor, its edges curling slightly. She retrieved it with care, her fingers steady, and unfolded a single sheet. Some secrets are best left buried. Leave Ashgrove Hall while you still can. The scrawl was childish, the ink smudged, but the faint scent of silver polish clung to it. The same acrid tang that lingered around the display cases. Miss Marple set it beside her teacup, her face serene, her mind alight. A clumsy threat, she thought, from someone who fears I see too much. But fear leaves footprints, and these are fresh. A villager's offhand remark echoed back as she sipped her tea, the candlelight casting long shadows across the room. The girl wasn't even supposed to be at the silver ball. Old Mrs. Willoughby had said at the inn, her voice a rasp over her knitting. Servants never were, yet there she was, out of place. Miss Marple's needles, resting untouched in her bag, seemed to hum with the memory. Out of place, she murmured, and in the wrong moment. Not a curse, but a truth too sharp to hold. A truth that Spoon carried, perhaps. She leaned back, the room's silence wrapping around her like a cloak. What did you see, Ellen? She wondered, her mind threading the mystery tighter. And what shadow follows you still? Lady Sylvia's tale came the next morning over breakfast, served in a dining room where the chandeliers hung heavy with dust and the air smelled faintly of wax and regret. She sat at the head of the table, her hands folded in her lap, her voice polished smooth by years of repetition. It was a grand silver ball, she said, her tone a rehearsed lament, to mark a family milestone, decades ago, before my time here. A guest, Margaret Langley, stumbled at the top of the grand staircase and fell to her death before the assembled company. Such misfortune. She paused, her fingers tightening briefly. The silver spoon was part of the evening's theme. Each guest held a piece of silver as a token. It ended up in her hand, and from that moment, its legend was sealed. Bad luck, they called it, a curse born of tragedy. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression placid, but her ears caught the cracks in the melody. The tremor when Sylvia named Margaret, the hesitation over the body's fall, and the vagueness of who found her first. A sad tale, she said, her voice gentle. And the spoon, such a small thing to carry so much weight. Sylvia's smile flickered, her eyes darting to the side. Small things often do, she replied, too quickly. Later, in the library, Giles offered a different slant, his voice blunt as he polished a hunting rifle he'd taken from the wall. A mistake, announcing that engagement that night, he said, his hand steady but his jaw tight. Margaret was promised to me, should have stayed quiet about it. The whole evening went sour after that. Miss Marple tilted her head, her tone mild. An engagement broken, then? Giles's hands faltered, the cloth slipping slightly. Broken? Yes, he muttered. By her own foolishness. Another man, beneath her station. Shouldn't have ended like it did. He turned away, his shoulders stiff, and Miss Marple tucked the shard away. A rival, she thought, and a fall too convenient. Not chance, perhaps, but choice. In the servants' hall, an old parlor maid, now stooped with age, whispered a darker thread over a cup of weak tea. She clutched that spoon, miss, she said, her voice a rasp. Margaret did. Dying, she scratched something into it, a name maybe, with her last strength. Faint, but real. Then it was gone, before anyone could look close. Miss Marple's needles, still untouched, seemed to hum in her bag. A message, she mused, lost to silence, or hidden by it. The morning stretched into a gray afternoon, the mist thickening outside, pressing against the windows like a living thing. The house buzzed with the auction's aftermath. Servants searched corners, collectors grumbled about delays, and the family retreated into tense silence. Miss Marple drifted through it all, her presence a quiet ripple, her questions gentle but relentless. Clara cornered her near the drawing room, her bracelets clashing as she wrung her hands. "It's that spoon, isn't it?" she said, her voice a nervous trill. "Cursed, like Julian says. I told Giles we should have sold it years ago." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Do you believe in curses, Mrs. Harrow?" Clara blinked, flustered. "Well, I mean, don't you feel it? The air's all wrong since it went missing." "Air changes with people, not objects," Miss Marple replied, her tone calm, though her eyes lingered on Clara's trembling fingers. "Perhaps someone wanted it gone for reasons less mystical." Clara paled, her laughter dying, and Miss Marple moved on, her thoughts turning. "Fear, not fate," she mused, "and fear has hands." Julian found her later by the conservatory, his smirk a practiced shield. "Digging for ghosts, Miss Marple?" he said, his voice low and teasing. "That spoon's got a knack for disappearing. Maybe it's tired of us." She met his gaze, her own steady. "Or perhaps it's been taken by someone who knows its story too well." His smirk faltered, a flicker of unease crossing his face before he shrugged and sauntered away. "He knows more than he lets on," she thought. But how much? Dusk fell heavy, the mist curling thicker, muffling the world beyond the hall's stone walls. Miss Marple sat by her window, the candlelight casting long, wavering shadows across the room, her tea cooling beside her untouched knitting. The house creaked around her, its timbers groaning like a ship adrift, and she felt the weight of its secrets pressing in, a weight she'd felt in countless villages, drawing rooms, and quiet corners over the years. "Something happened here," she murmured, her voice a thread in the silence. "Something that Spoon saw, something Ellen knew. And now it stirs again." The scream came at dawn, piercing the stillness like a blade through cloth. Miss Marple rose swiftly, her movements steady despite the hour, and followed the sound to the library. The door hung ajar, the air within thick with the scent of old leather and something sharper. Fear, perhaps, or death. Colonel Harrow, Giles's elder brother, lay slumped in an armchair, his body twisted at an odd angle, his hand clutching a silver fork, not the spoon, its tines glinting coldly in the gray light filtering through the window. His face, once ruddy with life, was now ashen, frozen in a mask of shock and finality. No blood, no struggle, just an eerie stillness that seemed to hum with intent. The housekeeper burst in behind her, her breath catching in a choked gasp. "Lord help us," she whispered, crossing herself, her hands trembling as she clutched her apron. Sylvia appeared in the doorway, her silk robe trailing, her face draining to a ghostly white as she swayed against the frame. "Charles," she cried, her voice breaking, though her eyes held something beyond grief, recognition, perhaps, or dread. Giles stormed in next, his fists clenched, his voice a roar. "What's happened? Who did this?" Julian lingered at the back, his smirk gone, his eyes wide but unreadable. The staff hovered beyond, their whispers a rising tide. Shock, fear, and something darker weaving through them. Miss Marple stepped closer, her gaze tracing the scene with the calm precision of a painter sketching a storm. The fork gleamed in Colonel Harrow's hand, deliberate, a cold statement etched in silver, not a weapon of chance, but of choice. "Why a fork?" she murmured, her voice a thread in the silence, her mind already turning. Not the spoon, but its kin, a message, perhaps, but for whom? She knelt beside the body, her fingers hovering near the fork, noting its polish, its weight, and the way it seemed to shine too brightly against the ashen skin. No struggle, she thought, no cry heard. A quiet death, a deliberate one. Sylvia's voice trembled as she clutched the doorframe. "It's the curse, first the spoon, now this." Giles rounded on her, his face flushed with fury. "Don't be a fool, Sylvia. Curses don't kill, people do." Julian stepped forward, his tone sharp. "Then who, uncle? You were up late. I saw you pacing the hall myself." Giles's eyes blazed, his voice a snarl. "Watch your tongue, boy." Clara's bracelets clashed as she wrung her hands, her voice shrill. "Oh, it's madness, pure madness." Through the chaos, Miss Marple remained still, her eyes darting from face to face, the trembling hands, the gaps in shouted accusations, the one figure too calm beneath the storm. Fear and guilt, she mused, a potent brew. But whose hand stirred it? She straightened, her voice cutting through the din with quiet authority. Constable Barnes should be called, she said, her tone mild yet unyielding. And perhaps we might all step back. Let the room speak for itself. Giles glared. Sylvia nodded faintly, and the staff scattered to obey. As they dispersed, Miss Marple lingered, her gaze settling on the fork once more. A message in silver, she thought. But the spoon holds the key. What story ties them together, I wonder? And who fears its telling? The mist pressed thicker against the windows, the house groaning under its own weight, and Miss Marple felt the mystery deepen. A web spun long ago, its threads trembling with secrets yet to break free. The mist clung to Ashgrove Hall like a shroud as dawn bled into a gray, oppressive morning, the air thick with damp and the faint, metallic tang of unease. Inside, the library stood as a silent witness to Colonel Harrow's death, the silver fork still gleaming in his lifeless hand, a cold, deliberate punctuation to a night that had spiraled into chaos. Miss Jane Marple lingered at the threshold, her gray coat blending into the gloom, her eyes tracing the scene with the quiet precision of a weaver threading a loom. The family shouts had faded into a tense murmur beyond the door, but the echoes of their accusations lingered. Sylvia's tremulous cry of a curse, Giles's furious denial, Julian's sharp-edged taunts, Clara's shrill hysteria, all swirling like leaves caught in a storm. Yet it was the silence that spoke loudest to Miss Marple, the stillness of a house holding its breath, its secrets pressed tight against the walls. Constable Barnes arrived with the heavy tread of duty, his broad face flushed from the cold, his notebook already open as he surveyed the room. "Morning, Miss Marple," he said, tipping his hat with a gruff nod. "Seems you've found yourself another tangle." She inclined her head, her voice mild but firm. "A tangle indeed, Constable. Colonel Harrow's death is no accident, nor, I suspect, an end. It's a beginning." Barnes scratched his head, his pencil hovering. "A fork, though, not much of a weapon, is it?" Miss Marple's lips curved faintly, a smile devoid of warmth. "Not a weapon of force, perhaps, but of intent. Look closer, Constable, the polish, the placement. Someone meant it to be seen." Barnes crouched beside the body, his brow furrowing as he examined the fork. "Polished to a shine, right enough," he muttered. "No blood, no marks, just this." He glanced up, his voice dropping. "You think it's tied to that missing spoon?" Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the window, where the mist pressed thick and gray. "I think," she said softly, "that silver speaks in this house, and someone fears its voice." She stepped back, her hands folded, letting Barnes take charge as the room filled with the shuffle of official feet. Constables murmuring, a doctor summoned from the village, and the staff hovering like ghosts at the edges. But her mind was already elsewhere, threading the clues from the night before. The smudge of polish on the spoon's empty case, the threat slipped beneath her door, the maid's absence, and now this. A fork where a spoon might have been. The household retreated into a brittle silence as the morning wore on. The family scattered to their corners like chess pieces after a checkmate. Sylvia sat in the drawing room, her silk robe trailing over the armrest, her hands trembling faintly as she clutched a teacup that rattled against its saucer. Giles paced the hall, his boots striking the marble with a rhythm of barely contained fury, his voice barking orders at servants who shrank from his path. Clara flitted from room to room, her bracelets a jangling chorus, her laughter replaced by a nervous hum that grated on the air. Julian lounged in the conservatory, a cigarette dangling from his lips, his eyes fixed on the mist-shrouded garden with an intensity that belied his casual sprawl. Miss Marple moved among them like a shadow, her presence unobtrusive, her questions gentle but relentless, each answer a pebble dropped into the still waters of her mind. "Charles was up late," Sylvia said when Miss Marple found her, her voice a fragile thread. "He often was. Reading," he said, though I heard him pacing. "I took my sleeping draught and went to bed." Her fingers tightened on the cup, the porcelain clinking faintly. I woke to the scream. Miss Marple tilted her head, her tone soft. "And the fork, did he favor it, perhaps?" A habit of his. Sylvia blinked, startled. No, no, I don't think so. He wasn't one for oddities. Her eyes darted to the side, a flicker of unease crossing her face. It's the curse, isn't it? First the spoon, now this. Miss Marple's smile was gentle, though her eyes gleamed with quiet scrutiny. Curses are stories, Lady Sylvia. People, I find, are far more dangerous. Giles offered a brusquer tale in the hall, his hands thrust deep into his pockets, his cufflink, engraved with the Harrow crest, hanging loose as if fastened in haste. I was in my study, he snapped, his voice a growl. Drafting a letter to my solicitor. Debts piling up, thanks to this blasted auction. Saw Charles head to the library around 11, muttering about old books. Didn't think much of it. He paused, his jaw tightening. Julian's got some nerve, pointing fingers at me. I'd not harm my own brother. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the cufflink, her voice calm. A late night for both of you, then. Did you hear anything? Footsteps, perhaps, or a voice? Giles's eyes narrowed, his tone sharp. Nothing but the wind. You're barking up the wrong tree, Miss Marple. She nodded politely, though her thoughts turned. Anger masks much, she mused, but it doesn't erase footprints. Clara caught her near the conservatory, her hands fluttering like startled birds. It's madness, isn't it? She said, her voice a nervous trill. Charles is dead, the spoon is gone. Oh, I told Giles we should have left this place years ago. It's that silver. It's cursed, I swear it. Miss Marple's smile was patient, her tone soothing. Do you truly believe that, Mrs. Harrow? Or is it the people holding the silver who trouble you? Clara faltered, her bracelets clashing as she wrung her hands. I don't know what you mean. I was asleep, heard nothing till the scream. It's all too awful. She turned away, her hum rising again, and Miss Marple watched her go, her mind threading a new strand. Fear sings loud, she thought, but it hides more than it reveals. Julian was last, his cigarette smoke curling lazily in the conservatory's damp air. Quite a show, he said, his smirk a thin veneer over something sharper. Uncle Charles always did have a flair for the dramatic, dying with a fork in his hand, no less. He exhaled, his eyes glinting. Suppose you think I did it. Inheritance and all that rot. Miss Marple met his gaze, her voice mild. I think, Mr. Harrow, that you see more than you say. Where were you when he died? Julian shrugged, his smirk widening. Upstairs, smoking, couldn't sleep with all the pacing below. Saw Giles in the hall, and Charles heading to the library. Didn't fancy joining the family reunion. He leaned closer, his tone teasing. You're digging for ghosts. Miss Marple, careful they don't dig back. She smiled faintly, unruffled. Ghosts don't leave polished smudges, young man. People do. His smirk faltered, a flicker of unease breaking through, and she tucked it away, her thoughts turning. He plays the fool, she mused. But fools see much. The day dragged on, the mist thickening into a fog that swallowed the world beyond the hall's stone walls, muffling sounds and sharpening shadows. Miss Marple drifted through the house, her steps silent on the worn rugs, her eyes catching details others overlooked. A smear of wax polish near the library's side table, a footprint too light for Giles's heavy boots, and a torn thread of fine cloth caught on the edge, too delicate for Julian's rough jacket. She knelt by the table, her fingers brushing the thread, her mind alive with possibilities. Not a man's doing, perhaps, she thought, or not alone. A woman's touch, or a careful hand hiding its strength. She tucked the thread into her handkerchief, her expression serene, though her heart quickened with the thrill of a pattern emerging. Dinner was a strained affair. The family gathered around a table too large for their diminished numbers, the clink of cutlery a hollow echo in the vast dining room. Sylvia sat at the head, her face pale beneath a forced smile, her hands trembling as she lifted her glass. Giles glowered at his plate, his fork stabbing at the meat with unnecessary force, his silence a thundercloud. Clara chattered incessantly, her words a nervous torrent. Weather, the auction, anything but the death. While Julian leaned back, his cigarette replaced by a glass of wine he sipped with studied indifference. The staff moved like phantoms, their trays trembling slightly, their eyes darting to the empty spaces where Colonel Harrow once sat. Miss Marple ate quietly, her presence a calm anchor, her ears attuned to the silences between words. "It's the spoon," Clara blurted suddenly, her voice cutting through the tension like a snapped string. "It's brought this on us. First it vanishes, then Charles. Oh, we're doomed, aren't we?" Giles slammed his fork down, the sound a gunshot in the quiet. "Enough, Clara. No cursed spoon killed my brother. Someone in this house did, and I'll find them." Sylvia's glass clattered to the table, wine spilling like blood across the cloth. "Giles, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Not now, not here." Julian laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Oh, let's all blame the silver. Saves us looking at each other, doesn't it?" Miss Marple's gaze swept the table, her voice soft but piercing. "Blame is a loud thing, but truth is quieter. Perhaps we should listen for it instead." The room stilled, their eyes flickering to her, and she smiled faintly, her mind threading the chaos into order. They all fear something, she thought, but not the same thing. Midnight came with a stillness that pressed against the house, the fog a thick curtain beyond the windows, the silence broken only by the groan of old timbers settling into the night. Miss Marple stirred awake in her guest room, not by sound but by an instinct honed over decades, a sense of being watched, a prickle at the nape of her neck. She lit the bedside candle, its flame casting a wavering glow across the room, and there it was, the silver spoon, resting neatly beside her spectacles, placed with care as if offered by an unseen hand. Her breath caught, not in fear but in awe, as she reached for it, her fingers hovering above its cold surface. It was smudged, faintly, as if handled by trembling hands, and she turned it over, her eyes narrowing at what she found. A date, the night of the silver ball, decades past, and initials, Yem, Ellen Marsh. Her voice, Miss Marple murmured, her thumb tracing the letters, her mind racing back to the whispers of the village, the half-told tales, and the unease that clung to Ellen's name. Returned from the shadows, but by whom? She held the spoon to the light, its gleam revealing a faint scratch beneath the date, a mark too delicate to read without closer study. A message, she thought, or a plea. "Someone brought you to me, but why?" She set it down, her heart steady though her mind whirled with possibilities. A confession, a warning, or a cry for help, she mused, the candlelight dancing across the silver like a memory flickering to life. "Whoever you are, you trust me to hear, and I will." Morning broke with a clamor of whispers, the spoon's return spreading through the house like a draft under a door. "It's back," a maid gasped in the kitchen, her voice trembling. Appeared like a ghost. The housekeeper, Mrs. Ellis, poured tea with shaking hands, her lips muttering a half-remembered prayer as the liquid sloshed over the rim. Julian refused his breakfast, his eyes flicking to the library with a restlessness that bordered on fear, his usual smirk replaced by a taut grimace. Sylvia sat in the drawing room, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her cheeks devoid of color, though she forced a smile. "It's found its way home," she said, her voice a fragile thread as Miss Marple entered. "Perhaps it's done with us now." Miss Marple tilted her head, her tone gentle. "Or perhaps it's only begun to speak. Lady Sylvia, what do you think it says?" Sylvia's smile faltered, her eyes darting away, and Miss Marple tucked the reaction away, her thoughts turning. "Fear speaks fluently here," she mused, "but silver tells the truth." A timid knock interrupted the stillness, Mrs. Ellis's voice hesitant as she appeared at the door. "There's someone here, ma'am, miss," she said, her hands wringing her apron anew. "She says she must see you." Miss Marple followed her to the hall, where a figure stood just inside the threshold, a woman in a worn coat, its patches neatly mended, her gloves frayed but clean, her posture rigid with quiet determination. Her face, though younger and sharper, bore an unmistakable echo of Ellen Marsh's features, a family likeness time couldn't erase. "I'm Mary Marsh," she said, her voice steady yet edged with a tremble, her eyes locking onto Miss Marple's. "I believe you knew my mother. She was a maid here, long ago. I've come because the past won't let me stay away." Her gaze shifted to the spoon, now resting on a side table where Miss Marple had placed it, as if it had been waiting for her arrival. The room seemed to contract, the air thickening as Mary's words spilled forth, halting at first, then faster. A torrent breaking through years of silence. "My mother vanished the night of the silver ball," she said, her hands clenching at her sides. "Left me with my aunt, a child then, and a letter, scribbled in haste, fearful. She wrote of witnessing something she wasn't meant to see, something terrible, and of the spoon, the proof, she called it, that could protect her or condemn her. For years, I've pieced it together, rumors, half-truths, whispers no one dared speak aloud. The broken engagement, the fall, the scandal, all circling that night, that spoon. And now it's here, back in this house. Her voice softened, a plea breaking through. I need to know what it says. If my mother was innocent, it's time the world knew. The family's reaction was a blade through silk. Sylvia's face lost its last traces of color, her hands gripping the chair as if anchoring herself to the earth. Who let her in? Giles roared, rising with a fury that shook the room, his voice trembling with something deeper than anger. What proof do you have for this nonsense? Julian paced, his denial sharp and hollow. She's mad, grasping at shadows. There's nothing to it. Clara's hands fluttered to her throat, her hum rising to a wail. Oh, it's too much, too much. Mrs. Ellis stood frozen in the doorway, her mouth opening once, then shutting, her eyes wide with a recognition she couldn't voice. Through it all, Miss Marple sat quietly, her hands folded, her knitting untouched, her gaze not on Mary but on the family, their glances, their tremors, the silence that followed certain names. The past walks in, she thought, and they fear its shadow. She rose, her voice cutting through the chaos with quiet authority. Miss Marsh, perhaps you'd join me in the library. The spoon might speak clearer there. Mary nodded, clutching her coat, and followed, the family's protests fading into a tense murmur as the door closed behind them. The library was dim, the air heavy with the scent of leather and dust, Colonel Harrow's body removed but his presence lingering like a stain. Miss Marple set the spoon on the table, its gleam catching the faint light, and turned to Mary. Tell me of the letter, she said, her tone gentle but firm. Mary drew a folded sheet from her pocket, yellowed, creased, its ink faded but legible. She wrote it that night, she said, her voice trembling. Said she saw a woman fall, pushed, not stumbled, and a man standing over her, furious. She took the spoon, said it held the truth. Then she ran, fearing for her life. Miss Marple read the letter, her eyes tracing Ellen's hurried scrawl. I saw it, Margaret pushed, Giles above her, his face wild. The spoon in her hand. I took it. It's marked. They'll come for me. I must go. She set it down, her mind threading the past into the present. Giles, she murmured, into truth and silver. She turned the spoon again, holding it to the light, and there, beneath the initials, a fainter scratch emerged, GH, etched with a dying hand. Margaret's voice, she thought, and Ellen's burden. She looked to Mary, her gaze softening. Your mother was no thief, she was a witness, fleeing a crime. The housekeeper's knock was hesitant, her face ashen as she entered. Miss Marple, she whispered, her hands twisting her apron into knots. I must speak. I can't carry it anymore. Miss Marple gestured to a chair, her voice calm. Then lay it down, Mrs. Ellis. The truth's weight is shared now. The housekeeper sank into the seat, her breath a shuddering gasp. I should have spoken years ago, she said, her voice breaking. That night, the silver ball, Margaret fell, but she didn't stumble. Giles pushed her. I saw it from the hall, through the crack in the door. She loved another, a stable hand, Thomas, and broke their engagement. Giles couldn't bear it. He raged at her in the library, then on the stairs. She grabbed the spoon and scratched his name as she died. I swapped it, hid the real one in the cellar, and gave them a blank one. But Ellen saw, she took it and ran. I thought it was buried till now. Miss Marple's gaze held hers, steady and kind. In the cellar, where is it? Mrs. Ellis swallowed, her voice a whisper. Under the loose stone by the wine racks, wrapped in cloth. I couldn't destroy it. It felt wrong. Miss Marple nodded, her mind alive. Fear silenced you, she thought, but guilt brings you back. She turned to Mary. Fetch Constable Barnes, we'll need that spoon, if it's there. The truth's waited long enough. The cellar was a cavern of shadows, its air damp and cold, the stone floor slick beneath their feet. Barnes followed, his lantern casting jagged beams across the wine racks, his breath puffing in the chill. Miss Marple pointed to the loose stone Mrs. Ellis had described, and he pried it up, revealing a bundle of faded cloth. Inside lay another spoon, identical in shape, but its surface bore the same date, the same EM, and a deeper GH, scratched with a desperate hand. 2 spoons, Barnes muttered, his voice odd. One a lie, one a truth. Miss Marple's fingers brushed the marks, her thoughts a quiet him. Margaret's last breath, she mused, and Ellen's legacy. The drawing room became a crucible as dusk fell, the family summoned by Miss Marple's quiet command. No refusal possible. her authority a soft but unyielding force. They gathered tense and restless, Sylvia by the fire, her hands trembling. Giles near the sideboard, his posture stiff, Julian apart, tugging at his cuff, Clara wringing her hands, and Mrs. Ellis and Mary at the edges. Witnesses to a reckoning long overdue. Miss Marple took her seat, not at the head but where she could see them all, the two spoons laid before her like twin relics of a buried past. "It's time," she said, her voice mild yet piercing, "to untangle this, not just last night, but decades ago." She wove the tale with quiet precision, the silver ball, a celebration masking a lover's clash, Margaret, betrothed to Giles, loving Thomas, a confrontation in the library, a push on the stairs, a dying hand scratching GH into the spoon. Ellen saw, she continued, took the proof, and fled. Mrs. Ellis swapped it and hid the truth in silence. Sylvia knew, shielded it with guilt, not greed, but love for a family she couldn't save. The Colonel and Mrs. Ellis died to guard a phantom. Julian, fearing a legacy lost, struck them down, not knowing the real spoon was gone. Giles's face twisted, his voice a broken growl as he rose. "She chose him, a stable and, over me. I couldn't bear it, lost my head, pushed her. Didn't mean to kill her, just to stop her leaving." Sylvia wept, her hands covering her face. "I knew," she whispered, "and I hid it for him, for us." "Oh, Charles," he suspected and confronted Julian last night. Julian lunged forward, his voice a snarl. "I thought he'd found it, the real spoon. He'd ruin me, us. I didn't know it was a fake." Mrs. Ellis sank into her chair, tears streaming. "I let her run, Ellen. Thought she'd be safe. I was wrong." Miss Marple folded her hands, the silence absolute. "Truth finds its way," she said, "but it leaves scars. Margaret named her killer, Ellen carried her voice, and Mary brought it home." She turned to Mary, her gaze softening. "Your mother's name is clear. She was no thief, but a guardian of justice." Mary clutched the spoon, her eyes bright with tears, her shoulders lifting as if a weight had fallen away. Warren stepped forward, his voice gruff. "Mr. Giles, Mr. Julian, you'll come with me. There's a reckoning due." Giles slumped, defeated. Julian cursed, his defiance crumbling as handcuffs clicked into place. Later, as night fell, Miss Marple stood by the hall's grand window, the fog thinning to reveal a sliver of moonlight. The spoons rested with Mary, a justice won in silver, Margaret's truth, Ellen's courage, a daughter's redemption. Sylvia sat alone, her elegance diminished, her silence a penance for decades of complicity. The village would whisper of curses, but Miss Marple saw human hearts, flawed, fragile, redeemed in their breaking. "Secrets bind us," she mused, her voice a whisper in the dark, "yet their release sets us free, though not without cost." She turned to leave, her step steady, her mind alight with the weight of it all. What would you do, she wondered, if a spoon spoke your family's truth? Open it, risking the scars, or let it lie, safe in silence? Your voices echoed in her thoughts, some craving the light, others fearing its burn, each a mirror to the tale. Curious, she thought, smiling faintly, how we all carry our own silver, waiting to speak. Some polish it away, some let it tarnish, but it's there, isn't it? Whispering. The moonlight caught her eye as she stepped into the night, the fog lifting like a curtain, and she knew St. Mary Mead would carry this story long after the silver dulled, a tale of truth, heavy but free.